Well, hello, it's Mauricio Bonifacino again. In this case, I'm going to present you with a brief introduction to the Barnadesieae. So, I'm going to comment on the distribution and diversity of the tribe. I'm going to comment on the defining features of the Barnadesieae. Then I'm going to briefly show you some of its phylogenetic context, and then I'm going to present the main genera and some peculiar genera that make up the Barnadesieae. Well, the Barnadisi are one of the smallest tribe in the whole Compositae, and they are restricted to the South American continents, as you can see there on the map. If we look at this distribution a little bit closer, and with a little bit more information, not just the distribution but the diversity, we see that there are basically three centers of diversity. The most notorious one is the one along the Andes, extending from Ecuador to Bolivia and northern Argentina. Other along the central Andes and extending into Patagonia, and then a third center of diversity in eastern Brazil. That center of diversity in eastern Brazil is, for the most part, represented by the genus Dasyphyllum. So if we look here at the genetic diversity of the Barnadisi, we see that it's made up of almost 90 species arranged in 10 genera, of which the most specious ones, the most species-rich genera, are Chuquiraga, Dasyphyllum, and Barnadesieae. All those three genera correspond with woody species, woody and thorny and spiny species. So what are the morphological traits that you see in a Compositae that let you identify the plant as belonging into the Barnadisi? Well, one of the features is the presence of axillary spines. Not all the genera in the Barnadisi have axillary spine, but most of the species in the tribe do. They have a particular type of trichome that I'm going to describe in just a minute that is called the Barnadesieae trichome. I know that referring to it like that is not very informative, but you will soon see the structure of it and will appreciate it, the distinctiveness of such a trichome. Then regarding the filaries of the involucre, they are very stiff, very papery and stiff. The receptacle is villose, very, very hairy. The styles are glabrous, and the branches are very short. That is very, very typical of the Varnisio. And the pappus is 138. The pappus could vary in the tribe, in the type of elements that compose the pappus. It's very common. The commonest situation is the one that we see in this example, which is composed of plumose bristles. But we also have other type of pappus. So in part of Argentina, they could constitute, the dominant element in the landscape, like this case of Chuquiraga Avellanedae in Patagonia. Here is a close-up of the shrubs. So as I said before, many species in the Barnadisi are either shrubs or trees. So in this close-up of Capitulum of Dasyphyllum, we could see another of the defining traits of the Barnadisi, which is the short and smooth styled branches. Notice how tiny the styled branches are. Another of the interesting features and defining features of the Barnadisi is that the corollas are always very, very hairy. And they have a sort of profuse induments that is made up of a very peculiar type of trichome that is only present in the Barnadesieae, and for that reason it has been called a Barnadesieae trichome. So a Barnadesieae trichome consists of a very long cell and then two shorter cells. One that is a sort of hinge cell, and then the other, epidermal cell that is level with the rest of the cells in the epidermis. So, as a recap, a Barnadesieae trichome is a trichome composed by three cells, one very large, one very long, and then two very short cells. Another of the distinctive features of the Barnadisia are the axillary spines that we could see here in the Chuquiraga Avellanedae again. Look how notorious the spines along the trunk of this Dasyphilum are. So these axillary spines are interpreted as the profiles of the lateral branches, and they could be either bifurcated or ramified, depending on how many of those profiles are going to develop in that lateral branch. But this is a definitive trait of the Barnadisi, although I might say that not all Barnadisi have them, but the vast majority of the species do. Here we have another illustration of a typical trait of the Barnadisi, which is the Pylose Receptacle. Notice how hairy that surface of the receptacle is. In this case, the species is Scliclendalia luculifolia, a monotypic genus from the Pampas region in South America. Here we have an example of one type of pappus that is made of plumose bristles. This is the most common type of pappus that occur in the Barnadisi. In this case, in the genus Archaedacyphilum, a recently segregated genus from Dasyphilum. And here you have the other type of pappus, which is the one made up of polyaceous elements. Again, in this case, the pappus of Scliclendalia luculifolia. So here you have a very small sample of the variation in the shape of the corolla in the Barnadisi. It's something that these basal grade tribes have, is a huge diversity of corolla shapes, and this is just a tiny sample. But notice the long lobes of the corollas. That is very typical of the early divergent lineages in the Compositae, and we could see it here. So we have some actinomorphic corollas like the one on the left, and then we have zygomorphic corollas on the right. Here we see again representation of some of the genera in the Barnadesieae in that illustration by Cabrera that we used to illustrate the micro characters of the style branches. So look how distinctive the apex of the style branches are between the different genera. The stamens in Barnadisia are very peculiar in the sense that the bases are obtuse or very shortly sagittate. And here what we have just mentioned about the different sort of pappus elements between plumose bristles or scales. So this is the most recent phylogeny available by Groenstetoild et al. From 2009, where I had plotted some of the traits that we could identify in the Barnadisi, like for instance the habit. Notice the predominance of the woody habit in the shape of either trees or shrubs, and how marked that clade that includes Dasyphilum, Archaedacyphilum, Fulcardea, and Arnaldoa, all of those trees and shrubs. Worth mentioning is the double position of Scliclendalia. I'm going to go back to Scliclendalia at the end because that's a very unusual and peculiar Barnadisi. Another trait that's interesting to look is the presence of axillary spines. So you see that Barnadisi, all species of Barnadisi have axillary spines. The same applies for Arnaldoa, Fulcaldea, Archaedacyphilum. Most species of Dasyphilum have axillary spine, but there's a few that don't. And most species of Chuquiraga do have axillary spines. And the ones who do not have axillary spines, the leaves are very spiny themselves. Look at what I mentioned before, the dominance of the pappus elements made of plumose bristles. That is by far the most common situation. Only 2 genera had palliaceous element, both monotypic genera, Scliclindalia and Dusaniella. And this is another interesting trait, which is how is the structure of the capitulum in terms of how many different type of floret there is. So we have that, a more or less even existence of either heterogamous capitulus or homogamous capitulus. So you will see that the combination of these traits already puts you, in a good distance to identify the different genera of the Barnadesieae. So just to give you an idea of what the plant look like and what are the main traits defining them, I'm going to illustrate some of the main genera. So Dasyphilum is the largest genus with 33 species. See? One of the defining feature of Dasyphilum, the easiest to spot, is that the left venation is acrodromous. If you look at the image on the right, you will see that in addition to the main vein, you will see 2 lateral veins, very conspicuous. So that is described as an acrodromous venation. And so it is not easy in Compositae to have a vegetative trait that could point me to a genus. But in this particular case, we do have that trait. In addition to that, Dasyphilum also has as a defining feature the fact that the apical appendage of the stamen is bifid. This is a group that is restricted to northwestern South America and eastern Brazil, and these are trees. That's what's interesting about them. So now recognized as 2 different genera, Dasyphilum and Archaedacyphilum, here in an image of some leaf clearings by De Lima Ferreira et al. From 2019, where they proposed the segregation of a subgenus of Dasyphilum that was Archaedacyphilum into they elevated the rank to genus. We could see clearly the difference between the pinnate venation pattern for Archaedacyphilum and the acrodromous venation pattern for Dasyphilum. So here we see an image of Archaedacyphilum. In this case, where besides the difference in venation, the apical appendage is obtuse, is not bifid. Archaedacyphilum is restricted to southern Argentina and Chile and only has 2 species. Here is an image of Archaedacyphilum. Look, these are important trees. Okay, here is another very common genus that you're likely gonna see along the Andes and in Patagonia, which is Chuquiraga. You see a sort of yellow shrub, very spiny with very stiff phyllaries. You could, shoot first and ask questions later. That is probably a Chuquiraga. So they are spiny. They have homogamous capitula. They tend to be very, they have a very fruity scent. That's very, very nice. The stamens are inserted at the base of the corolla, and this is a group that is distributed along the Andes and Patagonia, from Colombia all the way to the Argentinian Patagonia. Another genus is Barnadisia. So Barnadisia is composed by spiny shrubs or trees, contrasting with what happened with Chuquiraga. In Barnadisia, the capitulus are heterogamous, and the stamens are, in most species, inserted along the tube of the corolla, and is distributed along the Andes and also in eastern Brazil. Very colorful corollas, as you could see here. Then we have this very peculiar genus. This is an endemic of Patagonia. These are succulent herbs of heterogamous capitula. And the other distinctive feature of Duseniella is that the pappus is palliaceous. So only one species of Duseniella. And finally, this genus, the genus is Clendalia, a genus that is restricted to the pampas of Uruguay and neighboring Brazil and Argentina. It's a plant that has grass-like leaves that, in a trait that seems unique for the tribe, they are opposite, and the capitulus are homogamous, all with pseudo-bilabiate corollas. So it shows an interesting variation in the endowment that you could see in the plants, having plants totally glabrous and others totally pubescent. You could see here all these clumps that resemble grasses. All those are Scleclendalia. The one in the background are glabrous. The one closer to the camera, that is one that is very, very hairy. There's variation in the shape of the plants, in the size of the plants, in addition to the variation in the presence of endowment. And here there's a close-up of a young plant where you can see the attachment of the leaves and see the opposite disposition. What happened is that because they produce a lot of leaves and they attain that sort of cespitous habit, it is hard to see in an adult individual the leaf phyllotaxis. But if you look into the detail of the young plant, you will be able to notice the phyllotaxis. And with that, I finish this presentation, and thank you for your attention.